Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro, and we are going to learn all about Azure Functions. So we got a series of follow-alongs here, and we're going to be using functions quite a bit in this course. But for the start here, we're just going to keep it really simple and just learn how to launch a function. So what I want you to do is make your way over to functions at the top here, and we'll go to function app. So in order to create a function, you're always going to be creating a function app. You can see I have one running here for a later follow along here, but we'll go here and hit create and create ourselves a new function app. So I'll say create new and we'll say AZ-204 functions simple, because this is going to be really simple what we're going to be doing here. And then we need a function app name. So we'll just say my simple function app. Okay, if you can't get that name, you can always just do hyphen and put a bunch of random numbers there, because again, these are like unique domain names. They can't be used. So we have two options here. We have code and Docker container. Docker container allows us to supply our own container, basically running a serverless container for the payload. Then here we have the runtime stack. So this is the language that you want to use. Custom handler allows you to load your own, which we do in this course. This is such a pain in the butt to do, but we do need to learn how to do it. For this, we could do Python, JavaScript. I'm going to stick with JavaScript because it's easy. Notice we have some options here, and I'll stick with LTS 14. 16 is probably fine as well. We'll let it go to the default region. We'll go over to hosting. Notice that it's going to create a storage account. Function apps always have to have a storage account in order to store stuff somewhere, and so that's what it's going to be used for. We have two options for the operating system, Linux and Windows. If you do not care, try to use Windows because it's a lot easier, but there are cases where you might want to use Linux because of underlying libraries that you need to install. So I'm going to leave it to Windows, because if you choose Linux, what we're going to find out is that it's very limited. Actually, I'm going to go to Linux just to show you what I'm talking about. So notice we have three options. We have consumption serverless, functions premium, app service plan. So serverless just means that we only pay for what we use, and it always scales down to 0. Functions premium is pre-warming, so we avoid those cold starts, but we are paying a cost for that. App service plan means we already have an app in app service, or sorry, in Azure app. What the heck is the service called? Azure app service? Yeah, app services. And so if we already have a plan there and you have a virtual machine, it'll just run the functions right on there, saving you money. Very unusual offering by Microsoft, but I mean, I guess it saves money and it makes sense. So somebody wanted that and they built it. We're going to choose consumption serverless, and we'll go to networking preview. This looks fine here. We're not worried about that. We'll go ahead and review and create. And we'll hit create. So this doesn't normally take that long here. We'll just close out some of these tabs up here. While that is creating, we're going to go and type in Azure Functions documentation, because I just want some code to get off the floor here and running. So, because I know like with Func we can do init. We probably don't even need to do that. We probably just initialize our own code. So we'll wait for that to create. While that's going, I'm going to launch an environment. Now, you're going to need Visual Studio Code. I'm going to be doing this through Gitpod, but I'm going to be doing it on my local Visual Studio Code. The only reason I'm doing this way is so I have a clean environment that is running on Linux. You can use Gitpod if you want. Great thing to use. You don't have to. You just use Visual Studio Code. But for me, I just want clean environments when I'm working with you here. So what I'm going to do is hit Gitpod button, which I had to install with the Chrome extension. That's going to launch Gitpod, and that is launching Visual Studio Code. And then from there, we are going to then open that in Visual Studio Code. So I go here. This has a virtual machine attached to it, right? That's configured for Ubuntu. It has a bunch of stuff pre-installed. And so I'm just going to go down to the little orange button here, Gitpod, and then I'm going to click on, I don't see it there, maybe the cog. I always forget where it is. I'm trying to open it in Visual Studio Code. Maybe it is here. Ah, here it is. Open in VS Code. So we'll say open in VS Code. And what it's doing is it's, hold on, I'll pull this over so you can see what it's doing. So I'll click that again. We will go here. We'll say open in Visual Studio Code. We'll hit open. And that's going to run that. Right now we are getting an error here. So maybe I will resolve that first, and I'll be back here in a moment, okay? All right, so I'm back, and it looks like the issue was that I had to update my Docker. So had a very old version of Docker, and so I installed that. That resolved our issues there, just because Gitpod, when it syncs to my local machine, it's using Docker to, for some reason, for the environment. But anyway, what I'm going to do here is go hit my Gitpod button. This is going to launch me up Visual Studio Code alongside a dedicated developer environment, so that I can go and install things like the Azure Functions toolkit or things like that. So we have this here. And so what I want to do here is actually just go down below to the orange, and we're going to hit open in VS Code and say open in Visual Studio Code here. And this is going to open here. And it's just opening off screen. So here it is. Okay. And I'm going to choose Linux. And you might say, well, Andrew, you're on Windows. Well, the thing that I'm using right here is Visual Studio Code within the Windows subsystem Linux. So that's just one consideration there. But now this is synced with Gitpod. And so I'm not using, I'm not doing anything on my local computer. It's actually on my, this remote machine that's running here. So again, the reason I'm doing this is so I can show you everything from scratch. And the first thing you're going to want is the Azure Functions extension. Now, I would have shown this in Gitpod, but the problem is the extension does not show up here because it can't run in the browser. But it can run when it's synced to the desktop VS Code version here. So we'll go here on the left-hand side, and I'm going to choose to install Azure Functions. Another thing we are going to want is the Azure Functions Core Toolkit, or whatever it's called. So say Azure Functions Core Tools. And we'll just type in Linux, because that's what we are installing on here. And notice that there are 4 different versions, because this stuff changes pretty quick, but we are on version 4, so it's pretty easy here. We are looking for the installation instructions for Linux. So let's see here, up here, there we go. And yeah, I remember this. So what we're going to need to do here is open our terminal. File, new, terminal up here. And we're going to first need to do this GPG. This just validates the integrity of their package. So that's the first line we are going to run. Then we need to get the Ubuntu instructions here. So we're running Ubuntu, I believe, 20. And then we'll do an update. And then we'll install the package now that it knows where to look. While that's going, I'm just going to go to this tab here and just show that this is going to sync to our Microsoft account once we connect it, which it's not connected right now. If I type in, short for function? Yeah, so this is the CLI that we just installed when we installed Power Tools. So that was the thing that we wanted here. We are going to need to connect into Azure commands to log into Azure and manage resources, which sounds great, but I actually want to log in via Visual Studio Code. So there's a sign in on Azure on the Azure tab here. And I'm just going to open in any browser here. Chrome seems fine. And we will choose our account. And I'll go ahead and close this tab. We'll go back over to Visual Studio Code. And so here we can see I have my subscription. I have more than one project because I've been running these in parallel, but the project we're focused on right now is called My Simple Function App. I think that's the one we were creating, right? Let me just double check because I already forgot. And so we'll just do portal.azure.com. And we'll make our way over to the function apps here. I think this is the one we were working on because usually I would name this like, yeah, here it is, AZ-204 simple functions. Usually I name the resource group and the name the same, but I didn't do that there. And that's why I was slightly confused. So the idea is that we can develop a a function or thing here and deploy it. And the reason I wanted to install the core function tools is that it has a means to set us up with a template here. So it looks like we would type in func new. There's a new and there's initialize. So create a new function from a template, create a new function app in the current folder, and initialize the Git repository. So if we didn't want to go ahead and create here, we could have done a init and then would have done all the work for us. But I'm going to just do the new command here, and we are going to choose a language. So I'm going to say we're going to choose JavaScript. Also, we just use the -l, which is shorter, JavaScript. Scroll up here. And we probably need to specify a template. I wonder if we don't specify a template, if it will just go ahead and create it for us. There's this way of doing it, but there's also probably, we could probably just do it from here too. Yeah, let's just do it this way. This is so much easier. So if we create a function here, it says the selected folder is not a function project, create a new project, sure. And we're gonna choose JavaScript. And here are all the templates we have. So HTTP trigger, timer trigger, we got all whole sorts of them. We're gonna go with HTTP trigger here. We'll stick with the default name, that seems fine to me. Function anonymous admin, so function seems fine to me. And so notice now we have a local project, but when we say local project, it's really gonna be here in Git pod. So see here, it's the contents here. And so if we go back to the Explorer tab here, we can see all this code was generated for us. So we didn't have any of this before. So if you go to the top level here, we have our host JSON file. This is kind of like a global file for all of our functions configuration. We have local settings JSON. That is just our local configuration that we need to have. You'll see us utilizing this later when we need to set the web storage here. We have our package .json, which is the package manager for Node.js for our actual function. If we go into our function, we have a function JSON. All functions will have a function JSON. This is where we describe our bindings. So like here we can see we have an input trigger. So it says HTTP trigger. The direction is in on methods get and post. And then we have an out to HTTP type. Here is the skeleton code for our JavaScript function here. So you can see that we have the function, it passes in a context and a request. We can get the request name, the body of the contents. We can print the contents of that content. It's set up for like hello world. So that's the basic one that we have set up here. And so let's say we wanted to invoke this function. Let's go take a look at our commands. So just type in func. And if we scroll on up, we should see some stuff here. So there's a bunch here like Azure's, durables, extensions, function. And so likely what we want is to run it, start. So launches the function in the runtime host. So we have a variety of options there. So we'll type in func start. There's only one function, so it should execute our single and only function there. Or I think it actually will run all of them, to be honest. And so here it looks like it ran. And initialized, nothing super exciting. Whoops. Actually, if we start that and it's running, we should be able to open up a new tab and then ping it, I think. So I'm going to go back to the first tab here, and notice it says localhost 7071. So if we were to copy this link here, go to our other terminal, and then we were to do a curl paste and hit enter, we should get back a response. And notice it says this HTTP trigger function executes successfully. Pass the name in the query string or in the request body to personalize the response. And so if we look at the contents of our code, so it printed out this. It did not print out the hello because there was no name. So now if we were to go hit up and then make a query string, so we type in name equals world. Notice it says hello world, this HTTP triggered function executes successfully. So that's how we can work with the function locally. Now let's say we wanted to deploy that, because right now if we were to go back to our app Azure function and we're to go to this address here, which is the URL which it should be accessible. notice it just says your function point .0 app is up and running. So yeah, there's an app running there, but we're not getting this kind of response back here, right? So what we can do is go ahead and deploy this function. So the way we are going to do that is we're going to go back to our Azure tab here. And if we hover over this icon here, it says deploy to function app. And so here we need to choose our function app. So we choose it there so that it is linked up here. We can go ahead and deploy. And so that will begin the deploying process. It doesn't take too long for it to deploy, so won't have to wait too long. Oh, well, let's just go over here and take a peek here and see if there's anything interesting here. Oh, did it just finish deploying? Yes, it did. Okay, great. So what we'll do is hit refresh and maybe visit the URL and see if there's any difference. There is not. If we do name equals hello, there is nothing different here. So that doesn't help too much. Let's go down to functions here because they might have direct URLs for these functions if we go this way. So notice here it says get function URL. And so if I was to go and paste it in here, it's showing pretty similar. Like if we go here, this says my simple function Azure. I think that's the same. Okay. So that's not really helping too much, but let's go and copy this URL here back into our browser, or sorry, our terminal here. I'm going to just type in curl and then paste in and see what I get back. So I get that HTML back. What if I do name equals world? No. So it's not working exactly how I was expecting it to. Oh, notice this also embeds the actual trigger. Hold on, this isn't the same thing. So first I thought it was the same thing, but it looks like I actually didn't copy the contents of it. So if we copy this here and paste it in, so now we're starting to see a response that we want. So notice it says /API HTTP1 trigger. It's providing a code because when we set up that function and we choose the authorization mode, we said to have function, and that means that the only person that has access to it has to provide a code. If we chose anonymous, then we would not have to provide any kind of key whatsoever if it was public facing. But let's go take a look to see if this actually works. If we type in ampersand name equals world. So it does. So that is good. So that's okay. If we go over here on the left-hand side to integration, we should be able to see what the trigger is. So here is that HTTP request. Not a whole lot you can change here, but we could change this. No, I guess we can't change it retroactively. But so these things are kind of baked into this function here. Entity functions, the portal is not supported by the Linux consumption functions app. And that's something that I said earlier, which was that if we were doing things with Linux, we would run into some issues. So now I'm curious, what would happen if we launched the same thing as under Windows? So what I'm going to do is go back to my simple app here, and I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Delete. And that is clearly deleting, so I'll go ahead and create a new function app. I think it's still deleting, right? Yep, it is. Okay, great. And so this time around, we will choose the same resource group, function simple. And so I'll just say my simple function Windows. And so the runtime will be JavaScript or Node.js again here. LTS 14 is fine. We're going to go to hosting. Leave it to Windows this time. And we'll go ahead and hit review and create. We'll go and create that. While it's going here, if we were to go back here and hit the refresh button, you'll notice that previous function app has vanished. And so once this is deployed, we'll hit refresh and see that here again. And then we'll just deploy this again. And then we'll see if there are any difference in terms of the interface or UI. It looks like this is almost done deploying here. So give it just a moment. I'm just hitting the refresh button here to see if it's changing. Okay, so now it's showing up. Even though it's deployed, it's still not reflecting here in the portal. Okay, so it's finished deploying. So what I'm going to go ahead and do here, I'm just going to double check, is there any functions in here? No, good. And so what I'm going to do is go back to our project down here. I'm going to click the deploy to function app. I'm going to choose my simple function windows. This may overwrite any previous deployments. Totally fine with that. There are no previous deployments. And so that is going ahead and deploying. You can really see that Azure Functions is heavily integrated into Visual Studio Code. I suppose you could do this outside of Visual Studio Code because you do have the functions core tools, but honestly, it's not very easy to work with Azure Functions without using Visual Studio Code. So generally would not recommend it. So we're just waiting for that to now finish. We'll go into our resource here. Go over to functions here, see if it's shown up yet. It is still deploying. And it just finished here. So what we'll do here is go ahead and refresh. Your app is currently in read-only mode because you're running from a package file. To make changes, update the content in your zip file to run website run from package app setting. So there's a lot of conditions around about being able to edit things directly. So I'm just curious if we were to go back into our integrations here and we were to click on HTTP, if we could change anything here. So now we are still disabled. So it says your app is currently in read-only mode because you're running in this package file. So I guess that is something I should figure out next. So I'm just really curious, how can we get to a point where we can edit our stuff? Can we at least edit our code? Because that was something we couldn't do when we were using Linux. And so there it is. So that's kind of nice being able to do that. We could probably test it here. And so we really just want to do a get, and we are going to add a query string of name. It's acting kind of funny here. I'm not sure why it's not letting me type things in. So I'll just type it up. I'll just maybe copy it in here. Their editor's being silly. World. Yeah, it's not letting me type at all. World, just have to copy it in manually, I guess. And we'll hit run. And so here we get the output. It says HTTP world triggered function successfully. If we go up here and scroll up, welcome, you're connected to the logging stream. The default timeout is 2 hours, change, etc., etc. Now, whenever I used logs, I never rarely ever saw anything, and that was a large frustration for me. But hopefully through these follow-alongs, we will figure that out ourselves. But I do want to figure out this because I want to see how we can edit things like with the integration. So I'll be back here in a second with a solution, okay? All right, so I did some Googling, and here they're suggesting that this is kind of a bug because it says here that we are running it, like it's read-only because it's running from a package, and we didn't necessarily zip it. Now, technically when it deployed it, I suppose it could zip it and send it over that way. And so they suggest two options, which is just to deploy again to see if that resolves the issue, or go into the website run from package option and change that over. So maybe we'll try the latter just because I'm kind of more interested in that one because it'll show off configuration. So back in our function app, we can go to configuration here on the left-hand side. By the way, this stuff is reflected also here. If we were to drop down application settings, we can see the same values. It's just fetching it. That's why it's taking some time. And so we have some options here. And it's talking about this one here, I believe, where this is set to 1. And it says it's supposed to be set to 1, right? So in that, make its value 0 and click OK and save. And then restart your function app and go to code test menu to run your application. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go over to application settings. And I believe it was this one, right? Website run from function. I already forgot again. Yeah, it is. Or package. And so what we'll do is change this value to 0. I just clicked on it there to make that pop up. We'll hit OK. And then we will go back to our overview. Oh, I did not save those. We'll hit save at the top here. Sure, continue. And for those to persist, we will have to restart. Okay, I guess I didn't wait long enough there. Okay, there we go back to overview, and we'll hit restart to restart our function app. Why you have to restart function app, I have no idea, but that's just how Azure works for this. And so now what we'll do is go back to our function, click in HTTP trigger 1, and we'll go back to integration and see if that message is still there. So that message is gone. Let's go to HTTP request. Here it says one of the bindings failed to load. I'm not really sure why. We'll hit refresh again here. Well, I can change this now. Is this a bug? Let me just hit refresh. Because we were restarting our function app, so maybe it's just kind of acting funny there. You have to have a lot of confidence working in the cloud, especially with Azure, because the portal will sometimes lie to you. So the only way to get through that is just to like constantly work with cloud and be like, okay, I know this is what's supposed to happen, and just, you know, trust your gut as opposed to what's going on here. But notice that the integration tab is not showing up. Notice that the code and test is not showing up here. So I'm not sure if we broke it because we changed that value, because I don't really understand if we were actually packaging as a zip and now we've told it it's doing something else. But maybe if we go back to our overview, maybe it's still restarting and that's our problem. So we'll go here and yeah, I'm just not sure. Let's go back to functions here. Refresh. Okay, so our function doesn't even show up at all now. Uh-oh. It says it's running here. Well, let's just redeploy it again. It's not a big deal. So we'll go down here below and we'll click it and we'll say deploy function to app, and we'll choose this one here, our top one, and we will deploy it again. Because I'm really curious if it's just going to reset this value back to 1. I know it says 1 here, so maybe it is being packaged every single time. So I'm just waiting for that to show up again. And there really might be no way to avoid doing that, because when we look at our code here and we have a bunch of it here, like how would it not be zipped into a package and sent over, right? Like I can't imagine it not doing that. Maybe we'll just take a look at the output here. Auto1 package, npm install. As you can see, sometimes these deploys are fast or slow. That was not too bad. We can look at the output. I just clicked on view output, and this is something that in our output here, it's extended. If you go down here, you can see additional stuff. So I'm just curious actually what it's doing under the hood here. So if we scroll up a bit, use the following command to generate a script. Website script, CMD. I was kind of expecting maybe that it was doing, I like how it is .htm, that's totally ASP servers. But I was thinking maybe like there was a zip. Yeah, here it says creating zip package size, updating module. So it must be zipping the contents of it, right? And so if we go back to our configuration, I bet that value has flipped back to 1. And there might be no way around it, and that's totally fine. Maybe they're talking about something else that you'd have here. But if we go back to our, this one here, no, it's still 0. Okay. And we go here. Integration. Okay. No problems, no errors. No errors this time. Okay, and so this time what I want to do is change it to anonymous. And I have a really hard time saying that word, but you know what I'm trying to say. And so that has now been updated. So now if I go back to the code, even overview would probably work as well. And we get the function URL. I feel like it should be a lot simpler. Yeah, so now if we do name equals world, we don't need to pass along that function because that was those options we had there. Let's go back to integration. We had a third option, which is for admin, which I don't even really know what does. We'll say admin function authorization level Azure. Go down to admin. So here, no API key is required. A function-specific API key is required. This is the default value if none is provided. The master key is required. So I wonder what they mean by this. So each function also has a mid-level host name key called _master in addition to providing host-level access to the functions of the app. The master key also provides administrative access to the REST API. Okay, but where that key is, I'm not particularly sure. I would think the function, like, it would probably be under app keys here, right? So if we went to app keys, it's right here. So this is the key that they're talking about. So I would think that if it was set to that, we have to have that key. So that's something I want to try out here and see if that is true. So if we'll go into our HTTP function there, go back to integration, and then change this here so that it is now admin, and we'll hit save. I'm thinking that it will just generate out the master key there. So if we go to our code and test, and we go get function URL, notice here we can set what key we're using. So if we're using the function key, it shouldn't work, right? It shouldn't even have a function key. So there's this, and I'm just going to type in ampersand, name equals world. It doesn't work, and that's what I expect to happen. If we go back over to our get function URL here, I'm going to choose the master key on the host key. So the function key, I assume, is keys that are generated out here in the function. Yeah. And then the master key is part of the function app. So we'll go back over to here and choose the master key. We'll hit copy. We'll paste that in. We'll say ampersand name equals world. Okay, and so there we go. We can go back over to here into our integrations, and we'll click back on trigger. We'll go back to function here. Or actually, I'll go back to anonymous because that seems fine to me. Now we have a few other options here. So notice that we have inputs and outputs, and that's where we kind of get into bindings. But you know, hopefully that gives you an idea of how to set that up. So I think that's what we'll look at next is these inputs and outputs. All right, let's see if we can figure out these inputs and outputs. So I imagine what we can do is just add blob storage. We have obviously a lot of options here, but blob storage seems fine to me. For the storage account, Azure Web Storage seems fine. So this is probably the storage that was created by default. So if we go back over here, let's open a new tab here. We're going to go to resource groups at the top. Resource groups. And we're going to find the simple one here, function simple. And so here we should have storage account. We actually have two. I guess it's because we created one function app and then we tore it down and we had another one. So I guess when we deleted the function app, it didn't delete all the other resources with it. So now I'm not 100% sure which is the right one. So I am a little bit confused. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete the entire resource group, so we don't have to try to figure out what is the right storage account. And I'm just going to go back to function app, and we'll just go ahead and create ourselves a new one. So I'm going to say create. We'll just say AZ-204 function input output. Simple. And I'm going to do the same thing. AZ-204 function input output simple. And we'll choose our Node.js. And we'll let it choose whatever region it wants. Make sure that it's set to Windows. Totally fine. Consumption is serverless. Seems okay to me. Hit create here. And so as far as I understand, inputs come in as parameters, right? So if we go into our index.json or JS, I assume that it's going to be either in the request or the context. And so I'm thinking that it's going to be in the request because, I mean, that's where they're accessing that information. So I think that's how it's going to happen, but I guess we'll find out here in a moment. But I'll see you back here when this is done deploying, okay? All right, so after a short little wait, that is done here. So what I want to do is just kind of speed this up a little bit. And we're going to go back to our Azure here, and we're going to go ahead and deploy this function to our new one here, which I don't see. So maybe just refresh this before we do. There we go. And not sure if I can cancel that out there, and then hit deploy again. And we will choose the new one, input output simple, and let that go ahead and deploy. So that is now deploying. So what I'm thinking here is we want to input something into blob storage and then output something into blob storage. So I'm going to go to back to our resource group. Well, actually, before we do that, we're going to have that function open. So I'm going to just open a new tab here for when that function is ready. We will make our way over to resource groups here. And it's this one here. And if we go here, our storage account is here. Perfect. So from here, we're going to be using blob storage. And it should already have one set up for us. So if we go to containers on the left-hand side. Oh, I guess we actually don't have anything. Well, that's totally fine. So what we'll do is create ourselves a new container. We'll just say assets. Access from read and no anonymous access. Yeah, we'll say that. That's fine. We'll hit create. Oh, sorry, they were here. We just had to wait here. So it was being silly. So I think what I'll do here, because I don't think we need 2 containers. Well, let's go take a look at the actual example code of what we'll need. So I'm going to type in Azure Functions input. And so in the documentation here, they have examples for basically everything. So we're just dealing with blob storage. If we scroll down here, here's code examples for bindings. And so I want to take a look at the input. I want to take a look at the output. So for input here, we're using JavaScript. If we scroll on down, this is what the code looks like. So it is coming through context. So I was right. So I do context bindings, and then we have my output blob. Is this the output? Am I looking at output there? Hold on here. Input, output. Okay, so this one's input. They look very similar. And it says here, we could input that way. I guess that's the output. Oh, I guess the code would be basically the same because they're both being referenced there. Even though that's a little bit confusing. So if we go back to our function, looks like it has been deployed, and we will go back over to our functions folder and refresh to see if our function shows up here. It does, and we'll click into it. We'll go to integration. Notice that I cannot edit the inputs because of this problem here again. So we will go back over to here and we will choose configuration. And we'll go down to website from package and we'll change this to 0 and we'll hit OK and then we'll hit save and we'll hit continue and we'll wait for that to save. We'll go back to the overview. Oops. And then we'll refresh. Actually, sorry, we need to restart. From there, we can hit refresh. We'll go back to our function here, and we'll see if we get an error. Remember, I had to deploy that a second time. I don't know if that's true in this case as well. No errors, everything seems fine. So we'll hit add input here, and so we have blob storage. So it says storage account connection. That's the one that we're here. Blob parameter input. So input blob. So the name used to identify this binding your code. Yeah, that's fine. And then I wonder if that matches the code here. This is my input blob. And so this one is called input blob. Okay. So just so that everything's a bit simpler, we're just going to match it exactly as is here. Path. So in container name, the path within your storage account from which the blob will be read. So that means we need an in container in our storage. So I'm just trying to find wherever our storage is here. Is this our storage? Yeah. Because I made a folder called assets. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete that. I'm going to make a new container, and this one is going to be called in container. And then I believe the other one's going to be called out container. Out container, create. And so this seems fine to me, so we'll say OK. And then for the output, we'll do the same. So this one will be called my output blob. And we will hit OK. So we have an input, now we have an output. And then I just need that code there, so I just need that one liner. Going over to JavaScript here, yep. So Node.js queue trigger function press context binding. So yeah, let's just grab all of this. My queue item. I wonder if that's what it will be called. Because up here in the bindings it says my queue item. Oh, that's the trigger, right? So that's not very useful for us. I'm going to go copy this into our local code. So over here we will go back to the top tab here. I'm going to go into the index.json or JS. And we're going to paste this here. And really all this is doing is it's saying get the input, pass it to the output. So I'm assuming that if we put a file into that container, in that blob storage container, it's going to move it to the other one. That's my assumption here. So I'll just save this file here. And what I want to do is go back over to here, and we're going to go ahead and deploy this function because we've made a change to it. And we will click the top one here so we know where it's deploying to. We'll say deploy. While that's going, we need to go get an image into our blob storage. So here we have our in container. We're going to need some kind of graphic. Star Trek. It's always the case that we use here. Star Trek data. There's data. And I think we will go with this one. And so I'm just dragging this onto my desktop here. Oh, it's a web PNG. I wonder if I could save this image as a JPEG. So go here, and I'm going to, nope. I guess we have to save it as it is. Maybe this one's a JPEG. I'm just trying to drag one onto my desktop. Yeah, this one's a JPEG. So I just dragged this onto my desktop, renaming it as data. And then we can go back to our in container here, and I want to upload a file. And we will go ahead and select a file. There is data at our top here, so we'll say open. We'll look at our advanced options here. Azure user account, blog type, etc., etc. This seems all okay, so we'll say upload. Refresh. That looks fine. We're going to go back to our function here. I'm going to refresh here. I wonder if it shows us like revisions that we've deployed here. I'm just going to go back to our function because I'm curious. The reason I'm looking at this is because, like with other providers like AWS, it will version every time you upload. So if you wanted to go back to a prior version, you can. And so I'm just curious if it shows that there. I'm not seeing it, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not doing it, but I certainly don't see it. Let's go test this function out. And I mean, I think that it's set as function right now. So I'm just gonna double check there. I'm just seeing if we need the actual function key there. If it ever decides to load here. Well, I can just go try it as well. Nope, that's not the actual link though. I guess I didn't copy it. Anyway, so we go back to our request here. It's still function, that's fine. So we'll go back to code. And we'll choose get function URL. And we'll stick with the default function key there. I'm gonna hit copy to the board there. We're gonna paste this in. I'm gonna do ampersand name equals world. And so it didn't error out, so that is a good sign that it would have passed through that code. Now, the question is, did it take that input and pass that output? Because we didn't console log anything here, right? So one way we will know is if we just go back and look at our out container, assuming that's all we need to do. And there are no results. So I guess the next step would be to say, okay, how do we debug what is happening here? And so, you know, the most obvious thing I would think is just you do console log, right? You see like console log, you do context bindings. What if we could just console log that entire thing here and just say context bindings. So this should work. We'll hit save. And notice we have our logs down below here. And I guess we have this one up here as well. I never really observed that, so maybe we could just do a test run here. We just use the default key. That's totally fine. We'll do it a get. That doesn't let me do that. We're not going to worry about that. We'll just hit run. Delete that out, hit run. I just want to see if it executes the console log here. So notice here at the top here, it says JavaScript HTTP trigger function is a request, so it shows it here as well. And then down below, context is not defined in the stack. Well, I guess we have to spell it right if we want it to work, right? So I hit Command S and that automatically saved it. We're going to run it again. So this time we have HTTP triggered function a request. And for this, I don't see this getting called. So I just want to make this really obvious to make sure that it is working. Just in case I'm missing it for some reason. Oh, you know what? We have to do context log. Maybe that's the problem. Okay, we'll run it again here. I guess I was just used to typing console log because of, you know, standard JavaScript. So we get a lot more output here, so that is a good sign that we are in better shape here. So here's the new one. Or sorry, no, it's actually down here. And so here's our fun little graphic. And so then here is where we get all the output. So request, get, URL, there's a bunch of stuff here. And so maybe we should just extract this out here so we can get a better sense of what we're looking at. And we can go like JSON pretty. Paste that on in there. Undefined request. So maybe missing a brace or two. Because I really need to look at this to see what we're looking at. So we'll say new file. We'll go ahead and paste the contents in here. So we have method, URL, headers, there's an easier way to look at this, I don't know. So what I'm looking for here is the binding, right? Because that's what it was looking on. So notice in our code here, it says context bindings. And so we consoled out the context here. Or did we console context bindings? Is that what we consoled out and that's the contents? If we go back over to our code, yeah, this is all the contents of binding. And so I guess here it was assuming there's a my input blob. And so if we look at this here, my input blob, so it doesn't show up. So I'm not sure if it's just because we're doing it in the test run, right? So maybe that's the problem there. We could probably update our code so that it just says my input blob here as well. So what I'm going to do here is just change this to be this as well. Say V1. I'm going to save that, Command S. We'll go back and test and run this again. We'll hit run. And so notice it says undefined. It's not showing up here. Now I'm curious, will this log update as well when we are hitting here? I don't think it will, but let's try anyway. And I'm just paying attention to the duration here. So I'll just paste it here for a second so we can double check. We'll get the function URL, copy the contents here. We'll go ahead and paste that on above. And I believe it did move. Because this was the one we had here prior. Yes. Okay, so, I mean, that's good to know. If we have this open and we're actually hitting it for real, we can see it. But it's still showing the context binding as undefined. So I guess that will be where we need to look next. I mean, one question is, like, is there even bindings defined in our code here? Because we never wrote it in manually for our function. But maybe it already appears here underneath if we look at our deployed function. So notice here, like this is, are we in the right folder here? We're in the Ruby sample. So input, output, we can actually see the function here. And if we wanted to, we could run the function from here as well. But what I'm curious about is the bindings, right? So we can't see the code here. But in our local project, we have bindings in here, but they're not defined. So I wonder if it's just that we need to define those bindings. So what I'm going to do is just copy our updated code here. Oops. Just trying to delete out this last part here. And we'll copy the contents here. And we'll go back over to our index.js here. And then paste our updated code. We call this version 2. And then our function JSON, this is where we're going to add our bindings. So we have our input outputs. That seems good to me. I'll go copy that. And I'll just paste this below our HTTP option. We'll put a comma there. Here it says connection my storage connection app setting. Path samples, work items, queue, trigger. So I'm not sure what we need to set for that because those would be like in and out, right? So, I'm not sure. I'll be back here in a second, okay? All right, I'm back. And so I was just reading a little bit here about the path here. And so this path is the blob path. And what we really need to know is if we click down below here to configuration, it'll actually show us all the attributes, at least this one's for the blob, for its particular options. So it specifically has a path, and this is the path to the blob, right? So you go, okay, well, then that means that, you know, this stuff is the path. And so we know that this should be in container, and this should be out container, right? Now, where there's a bit of confusion is kind of this stuff here, because in our other one, we defined the triggers, we had it as name and name. And clearly Q trigger is some kind of special type of expression. And so looking at this here a bit more, there is a thing called expressions. So you go down here and it says binding expressions. And so binding expressions allows us to do some kind of interactive stuff. Here, like if you wanted to pass along app settings. So app settings are essentially environment variables. And so if you use the 2 percentages, we could take that value and pass it that way. But there's also one with curlies, and curlies, it's going to be different. So I was trying to find out, like this one is for blob source as file name, but when we were setting it up in the triggers over here in the actual app, it didn't say file name, it just said name. And so, you know, I don't know what those are for, but to me, as long as it works, we can figure it out a little bit in a follow-up follow along here. But so I know that these are the names in container, out container. I'm just going to put name here blindly and see if it works. And so we will save this. Just double checking to make sure this is okay. And we will give this a go. So we'll go back to our Azure function here. We'll click on it and we'll go ahead and deploy. And we will choose input, output, simple. We'll say deploy. So we're learning something, just those bindings, I'm not 100% sure on them. And I guess the binding could just be the name here that's, I'm not sure. Anyway, so what we'll do is we'll go back to our code here and we'll give it a nice refresh. Should say version 2 now since we updated it when we deployed it. Actually, it looks like the deployment failed. So we'll view the output here and see why it's complained. It says, some HTTP trigger URLs cannot be displayed in the output window because they require authentication token. Instead, you may copy. That's fine. But why did my deploy fail? And if we go back to monitor here, does it explain why? Back to our logs, nothing. Deployment failed. So no explanation as to why it failed. I mean, obviously it's because we updated something here. One thing I'm curious about, because we have a connection here, what's the format of that to be? I feel like that would show us here the name of an app setting or setting collection that specifies how to connect to Azure blobs. And so this one says my storage connection app setting. And I don't even think that's the name of it. The name of it is, if we expand it here, is this one here. So we'll just see if we can replace that there. I don't know if I have to use a binding expression for that to work. Job storage, Azure Web Job Storage, and then we will paste it on in there as well. And we'll see if we can deploy again. I should have told us a little bit more as to why it thinks it failed. So the name of the app setting or setting collection that's specified. So I'm curious if it would just show us an example here. So if you leave the connection empty, the function runtime uses the default connection string in the app setting Azure Web Storage. So I guess if we were to remove it, it would just already use what we want it to use. I'm just curious if we have to put those, what do you call it, the, if we go up to the app settings here, if we have to do the percentages around it, because that is actually where the value is stored, right? So if it fails here, then we'll just remove it and maybe that will fix that issue there. We'll give it a moment to deploy. So we can check the output while it's going. Just flip back over to Azure Functions, we probably can see it right there. Still deploying. Deployment completed. So no errors this time around. So I guess that was the issue there. And it looks like we don't have to put the percentages around it, or we could just remove it entirely to use the default storage account. So now what we'll do is we will go back to our HTTP1 trigger page here. We're going to give it a refresh. I want to see version 2 show up here. And it does. And so now we'll do a test and run. So I don't know who would actually do it during a test run. We'll use the default function key. We'll hit run. We'll see what kind of output we get. And I don't see anything. 500 error, internal error. So it doesn't show us anything. It's just 500 server internal error. Though I did notice here, there is a little red mark. So maybe we accidentally deleted the contents here on the end. I mean, this one's fine, right? That one has a closing one. Yeah, so I think we just are missing this. And we'll go ahead and deploy that again now that we have valid code. We'll say deploy. And yes, these deploys take a little bit of time, but you know, hopefully this works here. I'll see you back here when it's done deploying. All right, so it looks like our deploy is done there. So it says completed, no problems there. We'll go back over to our code. We'll give this a refresh. I could have updated that version 3 just so we know, but I'm pretty confident that, oh, there's the brace that we know will be updated. I'm gonna go ahead and hit run, and hopefully we don't get a 500 server internal error. But we get something slightly different. It says no value for name parameter name. So it's expecting a name parameter, and oh, well, I guess there's query parameters. I wonder if that's what it's talking about. So we'll type in name. I have no idea why it won't let me type in here, but I'll just go type in name off screen or within our code editor here, and I will cut this and I will paste this. And then we'll do data, JPG, because that's what I'm assuming, right? Because remember when we did the bindings, that's what we were saying it would look at. So we'll cut this and we'll paste this. And we will run this again and see if there's anything better here. Hello data JPEG, this HTTP triggered. So this looks pretty promising. If we scroll on down, that looks very promising. That's binary code, right? That's literally the image. Okay, so now the way we're going to really know if it's worked, if we went back to our containers. So we are back in our storage account. And then we're going to go into the out container and see that it is there. There we go. So we set up our own input-output binding, and it looks like that curly brace was just whatever parameter we wanted to pass in. So that's just your standard HTTP parameter. I wonder if that would work with a query string, because when you are using, you know, a get put repost, like if you're using get, these parameters would be query strings anyway, right? It wouldn't pass them in. At least I would not think it would not pass them in as like post parameters. So just as a sanity check, scroll up here. I just want to read here. I was wondering if it like showed us the entire function. What I want to do here is just go back over to here. This is our output. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to make a new query string. No, this is under query. Okay, yeah, so I guess it is right. All right, so yeah, I guess it's as simple as that. There we go. So we did input outputs. I'm just trying to think what else I want to do here. I think that's pretty much it. We are obviously going to do more with Azure Functions, but this is the most basic stuff that we can figure out for now. So what I'm going to do is go back over to my resource group. I'm just going to delete everything here, and we can consider this kind of wrapped up. Once I find it here, And we will delete this group. Great.